I can't be too soft. Does that make sense? Because then I'm somehow not, I lose sexual currency. And that internally has led to in many ways, is related to my singleness, I think, in some way. And my struggle has been to say, I'm going to be that. That's who I want. That's who I am. And there is a real masculinity and strength in that way of being. And take it or leave it.
Welcome to The Full Stop, a Childless podcast and online community with Sarah Lawrence, Berenlee Smith and me, Michael Hughes. Our podcast delves into the many reasons as to why people are childless, and we hope that with all our special guests and the discussions we have will help you craft your own narrative as we all learn together. Now, if you would like to be part of our inclusive online community, just jump over to our website www.thefullstoppod.com where you can find out all the information. And you will hear people mention Chester in this episode, and this is a reference to many of us meeting at the Storyhouse Childless event at the Storyhouse Theatre in Chester, UK. Now, this episode is also our contribution to International Men's Day, but of course seen through the lens of being childless, as we explore the provocative by design question: why is no one talking about childless men? So let's meet our panel of guests. So thank you everyone for joining us, and welcome to International Men's Day 2023. And today we're going to explore the question, quite a provocative one: why is no one talking about childless men? And today we have with us a great panel of guys who most I've met. And Don I'm yet to meet you, but that day will come. So rather than me rattle on, I'm going to introduce you to the guys in the panel, and then we'll crack on with answering that question. So first, Jay Palmer, who are you and what
Hello.
do you do?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on today. And it's been amazing meeting you guys at Storyhouse and then St. Pancras when we hooked up and stuff. I'm Jay Palmer. I'm a musician, as you can probably tell. So I'm a guitar player. I do this full time. I build guitars, build amps. I teach music. I also have a YouTube channel where I post a lot of my music and gear reviews and things like that. I'm part of the childless community. My wife and I are. My wife is Bindi Shah. Lots of people know Bindi in the community. And she's introduced me to the community over the last few years, and it's been just wonderful actually getting to know everybody in the community, becoming part of it as well. I'm quite a glass half full kind of guy, so I'm quite positive about everything. So it's been interesting interacting with everybody, and also starting to contribute a little bit to this whole question about childlessness as well, and just really looking forward to interacting more with everybody.
Thanks, Jay. Great to have you here. And all the way from California, West Coast America, at a very early time in the morning, we have Don. Please, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, everybody. My name's Don, and it's good to be with all you guys again. I've been out for a while, but it's good to see you, Michael, and Russ, especially. Yeah, I'm in California. I am a marriage and family therapist. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And I came into this community because when I turned about 53, it became apparent that I wasn't going to have children. By that, I mean that I'm childless not by choice because of being single, not being able to find a life partner. Everyone told me, hey, hang in there, guy in his 50s, good stuff. You're in your prime, you could still so and so. But when I turned 53, it just became, I don't know, just more real and apparent that it just didn't make a lot of sense to try and have children for a number of reasons. So I'm 59 now, and I think I'm I don't feel a lot of pain anymore when I see a young man with a child, for example, playing. I don't feel that tug that I used to. I used to have to kind of walk away a little bit. But so when I see that same scene, I don't, you feel a little bit of that sorrow, but it's not as strong anymore. So still continuing to go through the grieving process. But it is definitely an experience that I have to keep to myself, especially with my family. It's just if you don't have any children in a Filipino family, I should mention I'm immigrant, or son or eldest son in an immigrant Filipino family. Um, in that context, it's a real pronatalist culture. So my story just is mostly the questions I get. So, Don, how's work? And then it just sort of dies from there after I answer it with one question. Because we don't know what to talk about other than the children and how they're doing, things like that. So, this community has been real important for me to just have a place where I can be seen and feel seen and be taken as a whole person. So good to be here.
Thanks, Don. And we have Russ from Melbourne. So, Russell, who are you and what
Yeah,
do you
g'day
do?
everyone. Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'm doing all right. It's 8 o'clock here. Poor old Don. It's 2 a.m. in the morning, so he must be tired. Uh, so yeah, my name's Russ. I live in Melbourne, Australia. 54 years of age. My childless, not by choice journey started back in '98. Um, at the age of 28 with my wife, and we went through assisted reproductive technologies. Initially up until about 2006, and then we did one final abortive effort in 2012. I've probably got to the point now where I'm relatively at peace with that. If you can take out Father's Day, Mother's Day, Halloween, Christmas, New Year's, and everything else, where it pretty much gets posted on pretty hard by the marketing gurus. Uh, Other things, paramedic by trade, currently looking at moving into the family violence space as a specialist there. Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be an interesting conversation. I think there's a lot of things here that need to be discussed, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Russ. And we have Mike Sparks. So again, Mike, who are you and what do you do?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for welcoming me to this group this morning. Name's Mike Sparks, 65 years old, live in Hertfordshire in the UK, 30 years as a stockbroker and fund manager. Following that, I ran a charity for 5 years, and subsequent to that, I mess around in antiques, in particular antique and period lighting, so I've got the right surname. The story of ending up as being childless, it wasn't something that really bothered me until I began to get older, and it was really turning 60. I saw that as a bit of a milestone, really, and that's when it kind of really hit me, and more from a point of view of who do I leave things to, and stuff like that, and ended up in this situation following a failed, I say failed in the end, surrogacy arrangement with my first wife, which tragically ended in a miscarriage. And that sort of brought the whole world crashing down for quite a long time. As I say, I have really suffered with this as I got older, and it's about legacy and being surrounded by lots of friends and family, all who have children, and sometimes just feel completely excluded and just not part of it. So finding as I did and stumbling across Mike's great group, Mike and Russ and others who've been involved in doing it, I've really engaged with it. I've met some great people, met most of you, look forward to meeting others again as soon as possible. I've had a great time in Chester. We'll be there next year for sure. And that's about it about me. Anything else you want to know, ask me privately.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And lastly, but not leastly, the capo de capo, the Don of Dons of Male Childlessness, we have Robin Hadley with us. So, Robin, people should know who you are, but just in case they don't, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, I'm Robin Hadley. I'm a raggy-ass kid from Old Trafford in Manchester. I've got a minute, so 7 seconds a year to get through. And that's 5 seconds going, really. So I'm a working class lad, and I'm a jobbing academic, I think, at the moment. My route into childlessness is one through circumstance, and part of the circumstance is me, and I was quite shy. I'm the seventh youngest of 8 kids, and I'm also congenitally deaf. I was a birth trauma, and that left me with 30% hearing loss in both ears, which has got worse as I age. So when I just smile at you, the chances are I have no idea what you've said. And what happened? I got married when I was 26, and I was doing an okay job as a university technician, scientific and technical photographer. Not brilliantly paid, but steady, very steady. And then 29, we got divorced. My wife was younger. She changed job, moved in with a younger crowd. And we went, after being in sync in what were reproductive plans were, we went out of sync then. And I kept the house, and there was a economic crisis. The mortgage rates went up, and I really didn't go out for about 2.5 years, as I just tried to keep the payments going. And then eventually managed to sell the house, moved back to Manchester, and got involved with a really nice woman. And at one point she said, I want to have your babies. But the relationship broke up. And then I met my wife just before I was 40, and she's a few years older. And although she had wanted to have babies, she didn't. Now she was older, she's a healthcare professional, and knew the risks involved in that. So it's a choice for me then of what to do. And I remember thinking, well, who would want me apart from this woman here who's brilliant and batting out my league as it is. But where would I go? I'd have to look for somebody 10 years younger. There's a generational thing there, I think. And so I chose love. And in my mid-40s, my job was on the line because digital technology had come through and outsourcing in universities. So the writing was on the wall, and I trained as a counsellor. And I did that mainly because somebody said, I think you'd be good at it. And also you could do it in small blocks. And each block I did, I thought, I'll fail here, they'll find me out. And they haven't, until I've just admitted it now. And I got a PhD in the end in social gerontology, which is sociology of aging. But in the counselling, in my MA, because it was counselling, it had to be something you had experienced. And I was really broody in my 30s. And my supervisor said, do that. And that's when I found out there was nothing about men, really about men's experience and how men felt. So after that, I did an MSc looking at the levels of broodiness, because it's assumed women are broody and men aren't bothered, to see how true that was. And it's not true. And then I did my PhD looking at older childless men and the impact of childlessness across the life course. And that's me. I'm here now with you, and I'm very lucky to be here with you. Thank you for that opportunity, this opportunity.
Oh, it's really good to see you, Rob. Really good to see you.
Of course it is.
All right. Okay. We'll just move straight on from that one. So the genesis of this topic came from, for those who don't know, there was quite a large gathering of childless people in Chester in the UK last month, and the podcast was invited to go along. And one of the things I wanted to bring to that was the childless men's voice, but didn't quite get there. Because we were still deciding what to do as a podcast weeks before we got there. But what I did do with preparation is I put a poll into the childless men's community and asked them, do you feel excluded within the childless community? And the results that came back, as I said, were quite interesting. It wasn't a large sample, I have to say that. But the two things that came back was some felt that they were excluded. They talked about language, particularly, about what they see when people are posting. They would see that it is childless women. That was by far the biggest thing that they had seen in terms of language. Now, many felt that they weren't actually excluded, but men aren't well represented. So when it came to some of the things that they felt contributed to these answers, was that they don't know how or what to say. They're not prepared to put themselves out there for fear of being a target of ridicule. There's an imposter syndrome, which I interpreted as, am I really allowed to grieve as a childless man? And one of the most interesting one was, no one's interested in my voice. And when I thought about that, I thought, how sad is that? Now, I can't say that's my experience because I've obviously immersed myself into the childless community, and I don't see that, but I can totally understand why some men feel that way. And so I would like to hear your guys' opinions of that. So let's start with, do you feel excluded in the childless community? And let's start with Russ.
Look, I, like you, I suppose, ever since you started the group up, or I came into it after your ABC interview, I don't feel excluded in a space that is a men's space. It seems like in that place we have a voice, and we have some very healthy dialogue. We talk to each other, and we try and help problem solve. There is a dearth of conversation outside of those men's spaces, and it's one of those things where I believe men being men, we're at times our own worst enemy. The lack of willingness to have those conversations, and also the lack of willingness to bring those conversations into the general public. There's issues with feelings of shame, inadequacy, not a man if I can't have kids, that sort of thing. And I believe that there's definitely a level of exclusion there. Whether it's actively done or whether it's ambivalence, I'm not really sure. I don't think it is actively done. I don't think there's that sort of malice out there, to be honest. But I think there's a level of ambivalence involved in it, or apathy, one of those two things. Yeah.
Thanks, Russ. Don, when I think about this question, I think about something you told me some time ago, where I remember you approached a group in the United States because you were looking to create a network of childless friends. It was a women's group, and they didn't allow you in, is I guess the best way of explaining it. And so when I think about exclusion, that episode that we talked about some time ago comes to mind. So I'd really like to hear your opinion of that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel excluded?
I do remember that conversation, and I've had ongoing conversations with I guess the women's community, and I've even sat in, like, once in a while there'll be sessions where it's kind of a meet and greet, and it's sort of open, if you will, not just limited to women. So I've jumped in and been a part of like a little meet and greet of about 20 to 30 women. I'm usually the only man. Um, and honestly, I felt, I guess, excluded in the sense that the groups are specifically for women. So I've said, look, I can't find a men's community out there yet. So would it be possible to join one of yours? And I think they thought about it carefully and then perhaps felt a little uncomfortable or weren't quite ready yet to have a diverse group. And so was gently um, said, no, they're just for women. On the other hand, when I sat with the group as a whole, I felt very included in the sense that the women were very interested in my story as a man and were really grateful that I was there. Um, I think many had partners who sometimes they wanted to understand a little more, male partners perhaps, and were eager to just get any kind of male experience just to feel a little bit included in the male experience in general. So I felt included in that sense, very much so, but I did feel disappointed that I couldn't just jump into any group right away. So I then thought about it more in terms of, why do we as men struggle to have a group of men to start off with, and it sort of kicked off in that question. Um, so I want to be careful there because I did feel really. I've talked to several leaders and hosts of some of the platforms, and they have been incredibly warm and inviting of me as a man, just in general. But there is the groups are gender focused, yes. So
No, thanks for that, Don. That's a nice balanced view, which I think is important to bring into this conversation. Jay, what would be your experience?
Really interesting question on a number of levels for me, because I'll explain in a second. But do I feel excluded by the community? No, personally, I don't, because of my experiences. My initial experience with the childless community in terms of meeting people was when Bindi took me to Fertility Fest a few years ago, and it was for a men's talk. So there was Benjamin Zephaniah and Rod Little, who were doing their talk. So there were very few men there, but I didn't feel excluded by it. And Storyhouse was the next experience that I had. Again, I think Bindi was a little bit concerned that I might feel a little bit out of my element because it is predominantly women there. But I actually found it absolutely fine. And I think that's more of a reflection on myself and where I am with life and just my outlook and stuff. And the context which I was going to mention earlier is just my background. I'm Indian. I'm Indian heritage. I obviously have long hair. I've been like this since I was about 16, 17, 18 years old, which wasn't the done thing in an Indian community. So I've experienced exclusion from that perspective. I also experienced it from the perspective of the music I like. I'm a rock musician, so throughout the years, I've experienced it at various stages in terms of that. So there's the ethnicity, my likes, my music, etc. But what wrapped all of this up was I was a very shy person. I would like to think I'm a very gentle person as well. And this is something that I've observed within the community when I've met men in the community. So when I was at Story House in Chester, hanging out with yourself and Andy Harrod and a bunch of other people, one thing came to mind, which was like, these guys are really like me in terms of I'm quite a gentle person. I'm not really a a shouty alpha type of personality. And I think, and I felt that that's something that is one of the reasons why we feel excluded, because sometimes some of us have lived on the fringes. We've not been the ones out front, the very outspoken people. There's been a change in how I feel over the last year or two, and I'm just more confident within myself. So I'm able to just be myself. I don't feel excluded by pretty much any community now. It does kind of like, poke a little bit sometimes, but it's only for a brief moment. And it's just taking stock of where I am and knowing that there is a community out there that is inclusive. We're here today. This is inclusion for me, even if it's on a small scale. It's not as big as the women's community, granted, but it's a start, and it all has to start somewhere and grow from that seed into the tree. Only with our effort, us doing this, us talking about it, us being here and saying to the world, hey, we're childless men. We're part of we want to be part of the narrative. We're just regular people. We want to be your friends. We want to be kind of like interacting with you guys. I think that will help it to grow even more. And then the exclusion will feel less and less as it grows.
Thanks, Joe. We appreciate that. I'm leaving you till last, Rob, because I'd like to get your opinion on how your research sort of reflects what the guys have been talking about. So, Mike, what would be your experience?
There are certainly many times that I feel an exclusion in society in general, and I think that, and I completely agree with Russ on this, that it's ambiguous. It's not intended. It's almost like a complete ignorance of some people to the plight of childless men. It's a complete non-recognition, and it can make me quite angry at times, because I so much of society is geared towards people with children. Just about every economic forecast you'll see from a chancellor, no matter what his political persuasion is, will be geared towards the family. So much of the tax system is geared towards the family and people with children. And we were all children once, weren't we? So we acknowledge the importance of helping the young to become adults and responsible and law-abiding adults, hopefully. But I find that when I get involved with groups of friends, be that at a club or in a bar or at a restaurant or meeting old school friends, etc., so much of the talk is about their children, and now getting to my age, their potential grandchildren. And I can be sitting there just thinking that I've got nothing. I'm not really interested in this after just a few basic facts. I certainly can't contribute, and I'll wander off. So I do feel exclusion, without a doubt. But within this group, and may I say how pleased I am and how much it's helped me to find this group, there's total inclusion. And I think I mentioned it to you, Mike, when you very kindly came to see me last week, which was great. One of the strongest things I got from the Story House gathering in Chester last month was, and I went with a completely open mind because I'd never been before. I'm relatively new to the community. So I didn't know what to expect. I didn't expect anything. I just went with an open mind. But when I came away, I realised just how buoyant the whole atmosphere was. Like everyone else that was there, I met lots of people. And it was a real uplifting experience, because there wasn't, as one might have expected, sadness and downbeat. It was very upbeat, and in that, I feel total inclusion in this group. And Jay, you mentioned that there is so much that goes on about childless women, and rightfully so. But this is the beginning. It's going to take some time. but this is a beginning. Maybe we're beyond the beginning now. We're motoring through, but I'm very, very interested and committed to being involved in making society, not only in the UK but across the globe, much, much more aware of the plight of childless men. So in society, I feel excluded. Within this group, I feel very much included, and hope that we will, in the long term, achieve that objective.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it was good to see you last week. It really was. So, Rob, how does the responses so far reflect from the research that you've done?
Well, first, thanks, lads, for sharing. It's really moving to hear your accounts and how you feel. And you fit in a way that we all don't fit in, if you get that. Yeah, definitely there's been a lot about women and childlessness, and there's lots of sort of sociological reasons around that and how societies develop. And really, one of the things around that is why there's no social narrative for men around it. The narratives around men are around about virility, but successful virility, not only biological, but economic, social. So how is a man supposed to be man? And how is a man measured, I guess, is the thing. How are we measured? And I, very broadly, you could say women are measured by their internal validity, their existential internal validity through reproduction, through motherhood, and that's very strong. It social culturally depends where you are in the world, whether it's out there very direct and very structured, or I think more in the Western side, it's more over, it's hidden a bit, but it's still there's an underlying structure. And for men, we're sort of measured by what we do, and that's outside. And where's the narrative then to be inside? And I think that's where the struggle is in society. There's no narratives for us to occupy, or very few, and we're making that narrative now with our stories and being out there. But some things I was writing down that now I can't read, but about being in a group for men, I think generally, what do we talk about? It's stuff outside ourselves. It's football, it's music, what people are doing, what I'm earning. To be in a group and go, actually, this is what I'm feeling inside. Well, when I was counselling, I soon found out not to say, how are you feeling, which is like the standard counselling question to men, because you could see them struggling. Well, how am I feeling? How am I supposed to feel? And that's been put in them to be a disconnect from very early age. So I used to say, what's happening inside, rather than use the word feelings. And then they'd go, oh, well, it's this. And generally, if you said, well, what about this fella? Well, I'm not like that. Well, that's great, because then you can go to, well, what are you like? Or usually they go, I'm like this. So it's sort of identity by difference. Whereas I think for women, initially there tends to be a little bit more, oh yeah, I know what you mean. And then the difference comes in later in the conversation. Around that, I'm wobbling here. But what I'm going to do is read a poem I wrote after my MA, actually, because I think it encapsulates everything the guys were saying. And it's called Something Missing. A conversation ended before it began. Scattering thoughts of coulda, shoulda, woulda, dada. The latent maelstrom of the non-man. There's something missing, holding a life-wide gap. Breathing wallpaper, I am whole and incomplete. There's something missing, first to be left behind, first to be sent in. This line is incomplete. And that was from the guys I interviewed. And the key phrase there is something missing. And there was something missing inside, but there's also what we're discussing is something missing socially as well. And we're filling in the something missing. I think. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. Perfect sense, Rob. Thank you. I'm going to take us off on a different tangent a little bit now. We've talked about, do we feel excluded? I think there's also, so one of the things that Russell talked about was that we need to take control of this, and we need to turn up. We as blokes need to turn up in the community, and I would say the community as a whole. Also, do we need a little bit of help to actually get that space, find that space from the greater childless community? So one of the things I think about is recently I was told in the UK by a woman in our community that she says that being around so many childless men has reinstilled her faith that there are really nice, good guys out there. That really struck home, because the flip side of that was at Chester, we were given a question when we did our session, which started off around the language of, and I won't be able to do this exactly, but around the language of, men out there dicking women around. I think that's the way that it was explained, as if to say that, what it did for me was made me squirm in my seat, because I just felt that we as all men were getting painted with that brush of all men are bastards. Now I'm going on to extreme here, and I'm being provocative for a reason, so I can elicit some really good responses. I would be interested to hear from you guys about what do you think it would have taken for you to turn up to claim a space in the childless community as a way of inspiring other men who will be listening to this podcast and thinking, oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. When we look at that response that I was given, where, I'm waiting for childless men to turn up because they are really nice guys. It's really instilled, faith in that there are good guys out there. Who would like to respond to that?
If I've understood the question, it's about how do we encourage more childless men to claim their space and speak up. I think I do know other childless couples. I really only know of one for sure where the childlessness is not by choice. And that character is, they're both particularly good friends of mine. But he's a very, very alpha male, and it just doesn't seem to bother him at all. That couple have gone on to do all sorts of exciting and different things in life. They really have. They're completely welded at the hip. So I don't think a chap like that, he better remain nameless just for the sake of security, etc. But I don't think he really needs any help. He's just comfortable with it, and etc. etc. But I feel that it's important if you feel somewhat crushed by your childlessness. And I think it goes back to the answer to my first question. I think society can inadvertently make you feel like that, because, as you were saying, Mike, you can feel that you failed, that you're not a complete bloke. And it still is, to a certain extent, a bit of a blokish society, particularly amongst men. So I would urge anybody listening to this who feels that they have some negative experiences and emotions about being childless, probably actually the first thing to do is join the Facebook Childless Men's group, because you'll find it so supportive. There'll be plenty of people out there with similar emotions, if not identical emotions. You'll certainly get support if you feel that you'll need it. And certainly from my own point of view, it actually pushed me on to get involved with pushing this forward. So I think it's important, if you feel so inclined and you have the confidence to do it, to go out there and stand up and put your hand up and say, yeah, I'm childless. I'm a childless bloke, not by choice. And actually, do you know what? It doesn't make me feel very good. Can I tell you about it? And if they don't want to listen, then that's a shame. But move on. And yeah, stand up. Be proud about it in a way.
Thanks, Mike. Jay, what would be your response?
I'll think about this for a second. I've been contemplating it for a couple of minutes. I think my response would be to say to these people or these men, the community as a large, there are people out there who care, who want to hear your story. I think a lot of the time that's what stops us from engaging with people or communities for a specific reason. If we know that it is a safe space, if we know that people are going to listen, then we're more inclined to actually engage in that. So over the last few years, I've been hearing about all of you guys from Bindi, my wife. So to come and meet you wasn't an issue for me because I'd heard about how lovely everybody was. And I'd heard about how the community was and how they spoke about their childlessness. Yes, there's a grief element to it, but there's also an element of helping people. And that helped me to actually then say, okay, I'm going to come and see what this is all about. I grew up very, very shy, painfully shy, which is a kind of, it's at odds with what I do. You know, I'm a musician, I'm a YouTuber as well. And the thing that YouTube has taught me over the last 10 years of doing it is I have to be in front of a camera, you know, speaking to people and being myself. And over that time, I've become comfortable with doing it. But I do remember that initially it was scary to do. I was putting myself out there and not knowing the response I would get. That was the scariest part of it for me. If I'd known back then that the response would be absolutely amazing from people, there were really good people out there, and there were people who were going to support what I do and like what I do and be nice about it, then it would have made it easier. And I think that helps me with a lot of things. That's the thing that I keep in my mind now. I'll always look at it from that perspective, that there are actually people out there who do care. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to find them. And this community for sure, you know, is very much like that. I feel, you know, I feel like you know, if I needed to have a call with you, Michael, and talk about something about childlessness, then I could do it. It would be very, very easy for me to do that. And that knowledge helps me a lot, I think. And I think that can help other people. And it's something that I try and do when I was at Story House and when we met at St. Pancras as well, there were some people there. I decided to go and engage with them. I went over and said, hey, how's it going? This is who I am. And get to know them and interact with them, engage them. And then they felt comfortable. And it was interesting because, you know, made new friends as a result. And I felt that they came out their shells a little bit as well as a result of that. So for me, that's an important element.
Thanks, Jay. What about you, Don?
This is again, a very complicated question, Michael. I'm hearing the missing. That was a beautiful poem, Robin, on what's missing. And then I'm hearing kind of the misandry that we sometimes face. And then trying to reclaim your space. I guess let me just try to answer it from a perspective of a single man. I think that I grew up in a very patriarchal culture where men were actually elevated, but for their aggression, for their willingness to be quite alpha, to use your word, Jay, in the sense of not being sweet, not being tender, not being that soft male, quote unquote. So I developed this sort of exterior of trying to develop social and sexual currency through those ways. Being successful, status, money is how it's usually played out in my culture for men. And then that's supposed to then give you the currency to then have a wife and have children. And so my journey has been to actually reclaim that other part of me, that missing part of me, which is that part of me that is quite shamed in my culture, and particularly in dating. So I'm always like, when do I got to lead with being confident, but then I also have to be careful about not being too confident, but then I don't want to be too soft. And I find that, at least in my culture, I just speak to within my culture since that's what I know, that internalized misandry, or that kind of hatred of softness, is very generalized, but not just limited to men, but to women too. So a lot of the women, and they want that. Well, speaking too generally, in my experience, I can't be too soft. I mean, does that make sense? Because then I'm somehow not, I lose sexual currency. And that internally has led to, in many ways, is related to my singleness, I think, in some way. And my struggle has been to say, I'm going to be that. That's who I want. That's who I am. And there is a real masculinity and strength in that way of being, and take it or leave it. But that's, I don't want to be this thing that I've been prescribed to be. So that's been very costly for me. And my struggle has been to hold on to that voice, even in the face of childlessness and singleness. And then, of course, grieve the fact that I have to cherish and value that part of me alone for the most part. And Bernice, you mentioned something a while back in one of our podcasts that was really powerful for me, which was that, you take the hits and then you have to go back and kind of like reconsolidate yourself if you don't have a community, right? So you take the hit, and then it takes all this energy to like refine your center, and then you come back out. And that can take so much energy that you're just spinning in that. And so I really relate to that. But so anyways, that sort of doesn't quite answer your question directly, Michael, other than to say, yes, I do experience a struggle to come out, but particularly in this area of who I am as a man.
Thank you, Don. I don't think you're alone. I think there'll be many men that will that will resonate with what you said. And it's important because being single is a very big cohort within our community. So thank you for that. Russell, what would be your response?
What was the question? Sorry.
I don't remember.
There's been too much, really. There's been too many good comments. It's sort of hard to keep up. It was something that Robert said for me, and it brought me to that place. The one place where I probably feel the most excluded for me would be my workplace. Apart from the fact that I work with a predominantly younger workforce, probably 35 and under, a lot of prospective or current parents, and it's a common topic of conversation. And I know, Michael, it's something that you put forward to the Diversity Council of Australia. And of course, you caught them short because they went, "Oh, we haven't thought about this." And it was something that we started to put forward in the diversity space within my workforce. And it's something we're still pushing. And this is probably where my feeling of ambivalence from others comes from, is there are a couple of us that constantly put it into that space on Workplace or other places, which Workplace is a work version of Facebook. And the absolute lack of response to anything there. I put on two or three of us put on posts about World Childlessness Week. We put on other information and that sort of thing, and maybe got one or two acknowledgements. And I think that space there. Now that's from a non-binary point of view. And if you add to that the even lesser impact that being male has on that, it just seems to be that there's a lack of interest from anyone who's not involved in this. I know we can look forward to 2030 when a larger percentage of the population are going to be us than them, and marketing people are going to have to start looking at the childless community, otherwise they're going to start losing money. But that's not where we are now in 2023. And I wonder how we make that change, how we get people to take up that message. It seems really unusual.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Russ. Rob, so from your work, how has that fitted in? How have these responses fitted in with your research?
Again, lovely responses and very deep and very moving. So thanks, guys. It is difficult to say, this is me, particularly I think for men, because our deflector shields are put in as, this is me, I'm a whatever job I do, I'm a fan of whatever. It's all outside. So to come inside and reveal it. The woman who wrote Handmaid's Tale, whose name I've forgotten, said in another book, women fear murder and men fear humiliation. And I think there's something around that. But that's been put in us by society. We're all born with, broad stuff here, the same emotional response. So what happens? That men find it difficult to talk and find it difficult to reveal what's happening inside for them. But there is more coming through. Definitely, we are making a difference. And it could be that the shakers and the movers, particularly in the media, there's a generation coming through that reflect our experience. And on their reflections, as they journey through their careers, are realizing they're part of this group, and therefore the situations and our stories and our experience are starting to get more exposure, I think. I think from Storyhouse was sold out this year for the first time. It's on for next year. There's definitely more interest. I think I've noticed in one or two films that childlessness is raised by characters. So there's a groundswell coming through. And in terms of policy, like I said, in HR in this country, there's definitely a recognition that actually we need to include, it needs to be inclusive of everyone, not just those who have reproduced.
Berenice and Sarah, I'd really like to hear your thoughts about what's been talked about so far.
I have so much I've written down. I know I'm seeing Sarah scribbling notes down too. There is so much to unpack here. The first thing is just to thank you all for this. It's been absolutely wonderful to listen to and so informative that from the point of view of knowing most of you, or the privilege of knowing you in different ways for quite some time now, through the work that Michael's been doing, and Chester as well, the privilege of meeting some of you. There's still so much, I think, for us. I feel I've still got so much to learn from all of you. You see my desk is a swathe of notes here. Sarah, literally read out all these notes, and that's not going to help at the moment. I just need time just to unpack it a bit, because there's a lot here to think about.
Going back to the question you asked, Michael, about it's about the question, wasn't it, at Storyhouse? Around, we were for people that weren't there, I think the question, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, was from a lady who asked about men being in the community, and there was an allusion to perhaps safety for women, guys, childless men in the community. And I could feel the discomfort coming off you, Michael, with that question. I really sensed there was like, what do I say? And I think I said something along the lines. Again, I can't remember what I said specifically, but I think I mentioned that actually there's work for us to do as women individually. If we've had experiences with men that have left us feeling not safe around them, and I include myself in that, I've done a lot of work around it. But I think I also mentioned the fact that actually, and it kind of goes back to, forgive me, what Don was saying about male identity being soft and masculinity and all that stuff. My experience of men in this community has been that all of the guys that I've come into contact with have been very self-aware, obviously are not your stereotypical alpha male. I don't know whether we'd get alphas in this community. I don't know enough about it, if I'm honest with you. But there's a sense that actually through having this experience of childlessness, whether coupled or not, it changes you. And I think that's kind of how women experience it too. So you talk about the outside and the inside. For me, my identity completely changed as a woman because I was brought up to say, right, I'm going to be a mum. And I imagine for you guys, it's like, oh, you're going to earn this amount, you're going to have this job, you're going to have this many children, you're going to be this virile. And I think it impacts all of us, regardless of gender. Our identity completely shifts in terms of how we turn up and who we are. And I'm really struck by, at the moment, this sense of not completely knowing how to rock up, perhaps in this community or outside it. And I that's kind of the sense I got from this conversation today. There's not a vocabulary, there's not an identity, there's not really a thing that you can kind of grab onto. And your controversial question, Michael, was how have I contributed to that? And I think my experience was that when I went Googling, when I was struggling, the first thing I came across was gateway women. And I was like, well, that's a great start for me. It feels safe because I hadn't done my work on myself, and men for me were still dangerous. And that meant that it was safe, and it made it a good place for me to start. But actually, I invite these conversations, and I love the fact that our community is diverse, so that we can all have a conversation about it. But I hope that answered the question that you said you wanted provocatively to put out there.
Yes, I have
it does.
to answer it as well now. Which is kind of bias. I was completely head in the sand because my other half was not quite so. For him, having a child would have been the icing on the cake. In a previous unsafe relationship, it was just messy and was inappropriate. So I had a bias against the fact that I suppose I just thought it was only women that were childless, because I hadn't clocked on to the fact that actually, of course, there's childless men. It wasn't until really, actually, to be honest, Michael, I met you. And I thought, oh, hang on. Because actually I hadn't known any men who had spoken or had said, I'm grieving childless. And the interesting thing is that since my other half met you, which was only really, this year, a couple of weeks ago, he started to think, maybe I better get engaged with this. Maybe this is important. This is, to the point where he's going, I think I want to go to Story House next year. And that's big, because actually he said he wasn't grieving. So I think for me, it was shameful. I'm ashamed to say ignorance.
Oh, thank you both for that. I know that couldn't have been easy, but look, and that's, I really had no expectations about that question. I thought it would be a quite great question to just elicit what we've had today.
Brilliant.
And you bring up the fact that, look, as the custodian of 325 men's stories now, I think it is, I know that there is a lot of grief out there. The boys in the community here know there is a lot of grief out there. My dream, I have a dream, would be that this conversation actually brings us all together so we can support each other, so that we can support each other in turning up. Because I do feel quite emotional about those responses that those guys gave in that poll, because I just thought, fuck, that's so sad. And listen to you, Don, about how you struggle with your identity, you know, how are you supposed to turn up, you know, but at the same time trying to achieve what you want to in life, you know, it really hits home, you know. So, Russ has got his hand up. Thanks for saving me, buddy.
It's something that Sarah said, and it does make me wonder: is there an intersectionality there between the acceptance of men into that women's space because of the prevalence of violence towards women from men, and we give women a safe space to feel comfortable away from that. And, you know, there's, as we know, intersectionality comes from so many different, we can think of it with Don and his cultural issues, and also with Jay. All these things come in one on top of the other on top of the other. Do we need to be looking at our dialogue or our monologue, what we do as men, to take responsibility for that part of what's happening and make ourselves available, I suppose, and available in a non-confrontational way? And yes, the people in this conversation where we are at the moment, that's who we are. This group of men are that way inclined. But the statistics show that as a subset of the species, we're not. And that comes back from so many other concepts which are impacting on us now in our childlessness, which is toxic masculinity. It's the alpha male fantasy, all these elements that come in to stop us from feeling capable of engaging with each other and talking about this in that way. And yeah, sorry, I'm on my soapbox and I'll try and get off. But I wonder if that is something that's worthwhile engaging with, that sort of that barrier of how we get more inclusion in that space by making ourselves more available on an emotional level.
Well, thanks, Russ. I like the way you put that. Jay had his hand up. Jay, what do you got for us?
Such an interesting part of the conversation, because it reminded me of something that happened right after Story House, which was Bindi and I took a little trip. We went up to see one of my friends up in Chester. Sorry, not in Chester, up in Lancaster. And he had a realization that night, and I had a realization that night about just he felt that he lacked, or he had not supported me as much. He's a very good friend of mine. He's one of my closest friends, and he just kept apologizing and saying, I had no idea. I should have asked you. I should have talked to you. I should have engaged with you more. I had the realization also that, well, at that time when everything happened, I was I had to stay strong for myself and also for Bindi, because we were in a relationship and she was going through her grief. And one of us had to kind of keep it together. I took it upon myself and kind of compartmentalized the grief. So when I spoke to him, I was like, you know what, it is what it is, and I'm okay with it and stuff. And reflecting back on that, it was from that perspective of, well, I better keep it together right now, because if we both fall apart, then it's going to be not good for the both of us. And I've lost my train of thought. I've just gone down Robin's route now. No, I'll gather my thoughts again. But sorry, what was the line of? Just remind me of what the line of.
You were talking about the
here.
good friend and how you both had a realization that
yes,
yeah, he said he should have supported you more, and you had a realization that.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the general what we were discussing previously, what the question was, or which Berenice and Sarah had raised.
Talking about how we could all sort of about the threat that men can generally pose to women, and then how Russ challenged the point of how do we change that? How can we bring about change so there's safe spaces as well?
Thank you for that, Berenice. I remember.
You're very welcome. Not a problem. It's really the conversation. It is just to let you all know it is a conversation, so don't feel you have to answer the question. Rabbit holes are absolutely fine. It's like being down the pub.
Well, I was going to liken this to my work as a musician because I was at Music China last week, which is an enormous expo. It's a music fair. I was playing for one of my endorsers. And I had to be on stage with a guitar by myself in front of up to about 50 people at a time, just with their cell phones going like this. You know, it can be extremely scary. And I remember the first time I was on stage and the first few times, it was extremely scary because you're putting yourself out there. And as human beings, we want to be in a safe space. So for us to actually put our emotions out there as well, it's very, very similar. The feeling is very, very similar. How do I actually, take this first step to actually say to people, especially as everybody else has been mentioning, within societal constructs? I can very much relate to Dom's journey as well, because Indian society is very similar. It is. The men are supposed to be very strong, very kind of go-getters, and bring in the money and have good jobs. I wasn't always a musician. I actually I always loved art. I should have actually become an artist or an architect or something. But thought process in my mind, even from a young age, was no. I need to go into a profession where I have. Where I'll be revered. So I became a lawyer initially, and I did that for 10 years. And I basically put aside the artistic stuff for that time being in order to kind of try and make the same journey. So eventually when I met Bindi, I was doing music as a sideline, and she said to me, just give it a try, just start teaching. If it doesn't work, go back to being a lawyer, because I wasn't happy doing that. It was extremely scary to do that. And I think that's something that we're all going to experience, that initial stage of actually coming out and saying, you know what, this is who I really am. I am an emotional person. I cry sometimes, I get really upset sometimes, and things aren't great sometimes. I have shit days. And as men, we're not really supposed to talk about it, but we do talk about it. And when we have really, really good and close friends who are understanding, I'm very lucky that I do. I can talk to them. I can talk to them about it, and then they can talk to me about it as well. And I think we need to. Well, hopefully, we can bring that to the childless community as well, and help people feel comfortable, help men feel comfortable with saying, I'm here, I'm not doing too good today, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's going on inside.
Can I jump in there, Mike?
I'll unmute myself, and thank you, Jay. And Don, you've got your hand
up. Thanks, Michael. I just had to follow that, Jay. Appreciate you sharing your story. A lawyer, I would never have guessed from your background. I love the fact that you're not a lawyer, at least for the short term. I can relate because I was an engineer the whole thing, and it was a long struggle to become a therapist. And also just wanted to weave back to acknowledge, Michael, that moment when you drop down into something very poignant for you. And just it's a I just wanted to slow it down there because I don't want to interpret your sorrow or sadness, but I do know that it's hard for me to get there if other men don't get there. So it opened up for me also definitely a sorrow and a sadness for my father, for the men in my life, in my community who I cannot, I simply, it's just simply unsafe to bring these parts to them because I will be hurt. I will be brutalized if I do. So that's just something I'm gonna have to live with. But it is a feeling of not belonging that I grieve all the time and then have to fight against. And then so the vision of it that you're casting, Michael, of a space where we belong based on who we are rather than our categories, single, childless, or married, or with children, whatever, is one I long for too. Is what I'm trying to acknowledge. And then I just wanted to touch on what both Jay and Sarah said, because I think Sarah, you were talking about being cracked open, that we had a previous identity. Mine was very much trying to be an alpha male. It was toxic. I really want to name that I was aligned with this sort of shunning of single people in my first identity. I had several single aunts, single uncles who had no children, and I was very much a part of not talking to them about their lives and trying to become something that would make sure that I wouldn't become, quote, like them. So I was part of that excluding and shunning in my first identity as a patriarchal male, seeking status, seeking money, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that identity, because I was shutting down major parts of myself as a man. So as a man, when we do that and we lose connection with that, how then do we feel alive? Well, for me, it was possessing a woman and children. That was my bypass to the deeper work. If I could just get that plus the house, then I would be the identity would be complete. And many of my so for me, the identity that I hold on to now today, now that I've lost all that, is that my singleness, my childlessness, how can I put it? It's like there wasn't room for two babies in the crib. I had to rescue myself first and my own identity. And now that I have cracked that open and I'm slowly working towards reclaiming those parts of myself that I had hated along with my community and pushed to the side. To me, that's the essence anyways of like, first of all, just being whole, but second of all, fathering, mothering, eldering. It comes from that place. And so I don't know how to describe it. So that's the piece that I'm holding on to, that the loss was for that reason. Because I could have had, even if I was lucky enough to have had children, I would have been transmitting this awful thing. So I'll take that. I'll take that new identity, is what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, Don. I'm really pleased you turned up because I knew we'd be getting something profound from you today. Thank you. Mike Sparks, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. The title of this gathering today is "Why is no one talking about childless men?" From everything I've heard today and my experiences, and I think you'll all agree that it is well known that it's accepted that being childless as a female is such a devastating thing because there is that motherly instinct in the vast majority of ladies. But from my schoolboy biology, it takes a male and a female to create another human being, no matter what circumstance, which processes you go through, whether it be IVF or whatever. And that means that that urge to be a parent is and can be just as strong from the male as it is from the female, and therefore the pain suffered and experienced and the anxiety and the emotions when that doesn't happen is exactly the same too. We really need to create that space that this group is trying to do, and others as well, to allow men to come into as well, to express that. And I feel that very strongly. It's the same.
No, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And Robin, you would agree, because a lot of your research is based on the fact that men are broody.
Absolutely. I'm off mute. Fantastic. In my MSc, I did that thing, looking at levels of broodiness, and found they were very similar, which isn't. But the surprising thing is it's not acknowledged very much anywhere, really. But if there was a species with a male and a female, and either one of them wasn't interested in reproducing, then the species wouldn't survive very long. And so what's the advantage around denying men get broody, want to reproduce, and why is it all around women? There's all sorts of reasons for controlling women, for the motherhood mandate around that. I think the interesting thing about that study was the levels of jealousy and anger and depression were higher for the men than they were for the women, the childless men and the childless women in that study. It was only a small study, so you can't go too deep into it, but it's indicative of actually that lack of narrative socially for men to occupy, and that they can't express themselves or find it difficult to express themselves. And I just want to read something. There's a political scientist in America who wrote a book in 2006 called Reproductive Masculinities. Her name's Cynthia Daniels. And she puts, but only through the recognition of the vulnerabilities of men can gender injustices be transformed. We must see and believe evidence of male weakness and vulnerability. We must see and recognize men's intimate connection to human reproduction. And I put on that, I advocate a change in attitude towards men and boys, facilitated through the acknowledgement that the biopsychosocial complexity of life that is applied to everyone is also shown to men. Men are people too, because I think there's quite often men are just categorized of almost not being people, as in feeling messy, chaotic beings, which I think we all are. And I'm going to go to another poem, I think, if that's okay with you guys.
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. It's called No Candle, and it's about the life course. And no candle to light, no cake to cut, no nappy smelly, no teeth to keep, no hand to squeeze, no stories to read, no surprise to feign, no plays to see, no shoes to clean, no sport days drama, no parties to please, no presents to buy, no amends to make, no scrapes to clean, no kiss it betters, no tears to dry, no hearts to mend, no embarrassment to give, no graduation photo snapped, no can you help with this, no now empty nest, no grandchild to hold, no legacies to give, no one to call, no one to catch the fall, no wishes heard, no lived life described, few tears shed, no candle lit.
Well,
thanks, Rob. That certainly does encompass that whole life cycle of what it's like to be childless. Thank you. And so I think we should probably draw this to a close because we're now on to nearly an hour and 40 minutes. But for me, again, I had no expectations. I wanted to ask the provocative question, and it's been really interesting to see how we've pretty much all come to the same place where we're finding comfort in us being together. We are accepting who we are. And I really, really do hope that particularly other men can identify with us and get some inspiration, some strength, and some willingness to show up into the childless community, because as we know, people are waiting for us to turn up. And I really want to thank you all for today. It's been amazing. Berenice, Sarah, do you have any last words before we hit stop record?
Just want to say thank you. Thank you for your candour and allowing us to listen in, really. It feels like a privilege to hear a conversation amongst a bunch of guys that, as you say, you don't usually show what you think you're thinking or feeling. I really chimed with the conversation around having to be strong. My husband was having to be very strong. So he's still a nut to crack, as it were. So thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it.
I need to echo Sarah, thank you. I think there's so much more that we can do together. And I'm looking forward to being part of that story with you. And thank you for your honesty and your emotions. And thank you, Michael, for being a brilliant host. You've done brilliantly. Thank you.
Thanks, Berenice.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening. And a huge thank you to our guests for their time and wisdom. We will continue this conversation in the future because, in the words of Berenice, there's a lot to unpack here. And don't forget, we welcome you to our Full Stop online community where you will find companionship regardless of how you identify. And you'll find all those details at our website www.thefullstoppod.com. And don't forget to find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. X. We would greatly appreciate if you enjoy our content to leave us a review and rating, and this will help get the podcast out to more of our childless community and in turn allow them to not feel so isolated. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone. Thanks, guys. Oh, and tell Tigger that I'll be looking forward to that hug at Chester next year.
I will let him know. He said he was very comfortable in your presence.
Thank you.
I think he'd be really welcome within your community too. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everyone.